Alrighty, how's it going? Welcome back team, and today we're going to be doing a shoe review comparison video. We're going to be comparing the Altra Olympus 5 with the Altra Olympic 7. So these are two different trail running shoes by Altra. They are currently a couple of staple shoes in my shoe rotation. Absolutely love both of these shoes when it comes to trail running. So today I'm going to be discussing some of the main differences between them, what type of runs they excel at, what type of terrain they excel at, and so hopefully by the end of this video you'll have a better understanding of which shoe may suit you better. If you're tossing up between the two shoes and struggling to make a decision, hopefully this video will help you out there. So let's get straight into it. So let's just start with a couple of the basic stats and then we'll get into the more nitty-gritty fun stuff. So the weight of the Olympus 5 comes in at 350 grams for a men's, and the Lone Peak 7 is 314 grams for a men's. So there's only roughly, 36 grams between the two. To be honest, I don't really notice the difference in terms of weight. In terms of how it feels underfoot is a lot different, which we'll get to that briefly. But in terms of weight, they're both roughly around the same weight. So don't really notice the difference between them too much. Now in terms of the fit, they both come in Altra's original foot shape, which is their widest foot shape. It is my preferred style of Altra shoe. I prefer the original, the widest fit, generally speaking. So if you're looking for one of Altra's wider shoes, then either of these shoes are a great option there. Now let's get to the fun stuff. So let's talk about the midsole of these two shoes. So the Lone Peak 7 comes in at 25 millimeters of stack height. It's sort of moderate level cushioning. They use Altra's Ego midsole. It's fairly stock standard for Altra. A lot of their shoes use this midsole, so if you've run in Altra shoes before, you're probably familiar with it. The midsole here is fairly responsive. It's not too soft, it's not too rigid, it's not super comfortable, but it is very inherently stable, and you can feel very nimble and fleet-footed when you're using this kind of midsole, because you get a good underfoot experience, you get good ground feel when you're running in these shoes due to the moderate level of stack height and this style of midsole cushioning. So it really strikes a nice middle ground balance for a really good versatile running shoe. Whereas when we move to the Olympus 5, their midsole, they use what they call a compression molded EVA. So the stack height of this shoe comes in at 33 millimeters. So this shoe is 8 millimeters higher than the Lone Peak 7. It certainly has a much softer, more cushioned feeling underfoot. So if you prefer a higher stack height, if you prefer more cushioning, more bounce underfoot, then I would assume you would prefer the Olympus 5 in this setting. And I'll break these midsoles down a little bit more shortly when I get to how they perform on different terrains. But for now, let's talk about the outsole. Now in the Lone Peak 7, they use what they call their Max Track outsole. It's an updated version that they say is more sticky and more grippy underfoot. And I was seriously impressed with the grip and just how this shoe performs, especially on very technical terrain. So if you're familiar with this channel, you know that I love Vibram footwear. Vibram are very well known for their outsole, very well known for their grip and their durability. I believe the Max Track is right up there with the Vibram Mega Grip. It just performs so well on a variety of terrain, even when it comes to slippery terrain, running uphill up gravel or downhill down gravel. It's just really, really effective. You feel secure. Like I said before with the midsole, in combination with the midsole, you feel very secure and nimble if you're going down more technical terrain. And I've been using these shoes very thoroughly for the last 6 months, and it is still holding up very well. If you have a look here, this is the current condition of my Lone Peak 7s. There's a little bit of wear and tear here, more so on the outside of the shoe. Surprisingly, the forefoot is still in very good condition, which is very surprising for how many kilometers I've spent in these shoes, and also the terrain that I've spent in these shoes. I've spent a lot of time running downhill on gravel, things like that that would have worn down many other types of shoes, so very impressive in that front. Now with the Olympus 5, they use the Vibram Mega Grip. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Vibram. There's not really much else to say. Most people are quite familiar with Vibram nowadays. Their grip is phenomenal. You can feel very secure on a variety of terrain, but really I think it's a level playing field between these two outsoles. The Ultra Max Track outsole really impressed me, and I would say if you're tossing up between the two, both seem super durable, both super effective, so I would just give that a 50-50 between the two shoes in that category. So let's get to the fun stuff now. Let's talk about trail running and how these perform in different scenarios, different workouts. So let's start with the Lone Peak 7, and basically the kind of workouts I prefer to use this shoe in are shorter, faster, more technical workouts. So let's say we're doing a trail run. It involves some technical downhill areas. We want to run fast. The reason why I would choose the Lone Peak 7 more in this scenario is it's lower to the ground, so you have more underfoot feeling. Okay, so you can feel a bit more nimble, a bit more fleet-footed. The shoes are slightly less weight. Like I said, you don't really feel the difference too much in them. However, when you are bombing downhill and really sending it, that's where these shoes sort of come alive, and you can really turn the feet over really quickly, but you can rely on the grip. You can feel more nimble because the shoes are more compact. They have less stack height. So they're just overall a faster shoe over a shorter distance, and they feel a bit more secure. You can feel the ground underneath you more than the Olympus. So like I said, on technical terrain, I feel a lot more confident in the Lone Peak 7s. Now for the Olympus 5, I'd say they're probably a more versatile and also long distance shoe. So if I'm doing a hybrid run that involves trails and road, then the Olympus 5 is now my new go-to for this scenario, just because the compression molded EVA feels nicer on the road and the pavement compared to the Lone Peak 7. It's more forgiving, there's more bounce and feedback to it, so it just feels nicer basically. And I do find that the Max Track grip on the Lone Peak 7s does have a bit of tackiness, and it sort of feels like it sticks to the pavement in the road. Now this is great when it comes to the trail, but when it comes to the road, it's just a little bit distracting. So that's where the Olympus 5 performs better in that hybrid setting. Now also when it comes to going downhill in the Olympus 5, I feel I can land a little bit heavier and get away with it, just simply because that midsole is more forgiving. It's got more squish, more bounce to it. So I can sort of rely more on my thigh muscles as opposed to my calf muscles when I'm running downhill. So if you're familiar with downhill running, you'll know that you can sort of switch up your cadence, you can switch up your stride length, you can switch up where you land. So if you're hitting your heels more with a short, choppy cadence, if you're sort of hitting the brakes, so to speak, then if you're relying on a more padded or a higher stack height, a more forgiving midsole, that's where the Olympus 5 sort of shines in this area. Whereas the Lone Peak 7, you sort of have to make sure you're landing nice and light on your forefoot. You can't really get away with slamming down on the heels so much when it comes to those shoes. So to tie that all together, Lone Peak 7, in my opinion, is better over shorter, faster, more technical terrain. Olympus 5 better over hybrid runs that involve trail and road, better over long runs. And if you've got some downhill sections that are not too technical and you just want to absolutely send it, the Olympus 5 really does come alive in this setting. I found there was a little bit of adjusting, just getting used to the 33mm stack height, but that's because my running background sort of started barefoot and Vibrams, so I think that's more just a personal thing that I personally have to get more familiar with. So if you're familiar with that kind of shape and style of shoe, you will still feel comfortable even hitting technical terrain in the Olympus 5. Now a few little minor details before we wrap this thing up. I do tend to feel a little bit of foot discomfort in the Olympus 5 compared to the Lone Peak 7s. I think it's because the midsole cushioning is a little softer, and generally when we look at how our foot operates on different surfaces, when we walk or run barefoot often and we are walking on hard surfaces, it may seem a little counterintuitive, but the foot actually becomes more mobile and it gets more dexterity and suppleness to it. So I think the foot seems to become a little bit less mobile and sort of tense up a little bit the softer the midsole cushioning that you're running in. So it's just something to consider, and you can easily relieve this tension just with a little bit of myofascial release, just rolling your foot over a release ball or some massage or a massage gun, something like that. But it is something that I think is important to consider, especially when you're looking at something like your shoe rotation and how you are rotating your shoes day to day. If you only run in very plush, soft cushioning, then you probably have to offset that with a little bit more foot care. So that's just something to consider. One last thing is just looking at the overall upper and the structure. Both shoes are fairly similar in this regard. They're quite breathable, they've got a little bit of stretch to them. The overall fit is just nice and comfortable, nice and roomy in the toe box, which is expected with the original fit of this shoe. There's definitely a lot of difference between the tongue in these shoes though. With the Olympus 5, the first couple runs I did in them, the tongue seemed to be scratching the bottom of my ankle, and it was actually quite distracting. I tried pulling my socks up, but then they would sort of slip down. So you may need some higher socks with the Olympus 5. However, it seems to have just somehow worked its way out. I haven't noticed the scratching on the ankle in the last couple of runs, so I actually have no idea what's happened there. But it doesn't bother me anymore. When it comes to the Lone Peak 7, they have a more traditional, more plush sort of cushioned tongue. From reading other reviews and watching other videos online, I think most people will prefer the tongue of the Lone Peak 7 over the Olympus. But I mean, once you get into your runs, I don't think it's too much of an issue, personally speaking. I think overall the fit and the midsole and the outsole are definitely more important factors to consider, but I just thought I'd add that in there. And the lacing that the Olympus 5 use it's got a weird texture to it. It's quite stiff, and the laces were actually quite short, so I have to be very careful when I tie them up that I don't run out of lace. So you may find that you need to actually replace the lacing in the Olympus 5. It may be a little bit frustrating in that front, but if you can tie it up nice and tight, it's absolutely fine. Whereas the Lone Peak 7 use a more typical lace that you'd find on a regular shoe. It feels a bit more cotton based, it's a bit softer, easier to tie up, and you definitely don't have to worry about pulling it as tight. With the Olympus 5, you have to pull the laces really tight for it to feel like it's actually secured in and isn't going to come loose during a run. So that'll pretty much do it for this video. That's my comparison between the Ultra Olympus 5, the Ultra Lone Peak 7. If you have any more questions, I'm sure I've missed a few things here and there, so if you want more clarity on certain specifics and details between the shoes, just comment down below, ask a question, I'll be happy to help. And I hope that's cleared up things for you and will help you make a more informed decision whether you are picking between these two shoes. So yeah, like I said, hope it helps. Thanks for the support as always, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.